Now for the stack of hardcovers. If by chance this video is too long, this is going to be part 2 of my unhaul haul from the wonderful, wonderful used bookstore. These are books that I picked up using the store credit that I got for unhauling some books. To begin, right off the top, I have Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld, sorry. And this is a modern, updated retelling of Pride and Prejudice. I've actually never read Pride and Prejudice, but I really want to. And I like the idea of reading retellings. I really enjoy retellings. I found a book that I've been trying to get my hands on for a while in beautiful hardcover, and that is P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han. I have probably raved about Jenny Han a couple of times on my channel, but I really, really love her writing style. I actually have had the pleasure of meeting her as in she came to my school to speak to some to the students, and then did a book signing on the day that we had a book fair at Barnes and Noble's. So it was pretty cool getting to sort of have a brush with a famous author, and I really enjoyed everything that she had to say. She just seemed like she was a really down-to-earth kind of person. I ended up reading To All the Boys I've Loved Before and P.S. I Still Love You basically immediately after I met her, and I loved them so much. So I've always wanted to get my hands on one, but I've never been able to justify the cost. But this was $3. It was there. It was calling my name, and so I ended up picking it up. And if you're not familiar with the the Lara Jean series, I don't know what they're called. This duology series now of books. This is a story about a girl, Lara Jean, who, when she would have a crush on a boy, what she would do is she would write them a love letter. And that was her way of sort of putting that crush out there into the universe without actually having to deal with confrontation and meeting that dude face to face and telling them that she liked them. Unfortunately, that box of letters ends up getting mailed out and to the boys that she wrote them to. So then she gets to go through the path of, oh my gosh, these people know that I liked them, what kind of situation. And it's a pretty cool story. I really love it. I would strongly recommend it, especially if you're not necessarily into contemporaries. I think that this is a contemporary romance kind of story that is worth reading. Oh, the next one is Dan vs. Nature by Don Calame. I picked this up because it reminded me of The Parent Trap. This is a story about a guy named Dan whose mother is a single mother and wants nothing more than to find her own Prince Charming. Enter Hank, a Hugh Jackman look-alike and Dan's now future stepfather. Dan is not pleased with Hank. He doesn't like him at all and wants nothing more but to break up his parents. Hank invites Dan on a sort of potential stepfather bonding sort of experimental trip out in the wilderness, and Dan is like, what? Why? And ends up taking it as an opportunity to prank and embarrass the bejesus out of Hank to try and get him, or chase him away basically from his mother and their family. It ends up being a story full of shenanigans and life-threatening situations, where it ends up being a situation where Dan ends up having to potentially save the day. It's just an interesting story that I can't help but feel does parallel the Parent Trap kind of story where they go camping. And I think I'm thinking of the newer one with Lindsay Lohan? Is that what her name was? I don't remember. But it's just reminds me of the movie, and so therefore I had to pick it up. The next one is kind of interesting because the inside flap actually considers it a documentary style book. This is Countdown by Deborah Wiles, and it is a story about a girl named Franny who lives in the US during 1962 when the US was living with the fear that Russia would drop a bomb on them at any time. But what makes this book cool is not just because it's coming from a place of distress, but it uses actual pictures and newspaper articles and stuff interspersed within the story to tell this story in a documentary-like style, and that really caught my attention because I've never seen a book that was written quite like this. Also, check out the actual hardcover. And I ended up picking up a Siobhan Vivian book called The List. It takes place in a high school where every year before homecoming, a list is published. I don't know who creates the list, where it comes from, but this list names the prettiest and the ugliest girl in every year. And this is the story of the girls whose names get put on that list and the changes that happen in their lives as a result of being put on this list. It sounded like an interesting kind of high school contemporary drama, but I can imagine it's going to be a good story. This next one is a kind of creepy kind of a story. This is The Accident Season by Moira Fowley Doyle, and this is a story about a family where every October accidents just seem to randomly strike their family, all of their family members, and sometimes it's a bad season and sometimes it's not so bad. These accidents can have tragic consequences, and it doesn't seem like they happen for any reason. And the question arises of whether or not their family is actually cursed, and the main character decides that she's kind of done with it, and she decides to figure out what exactly is happening, why this is happening to her family, and how can she potentially stop it, because she's done losing family members from these accidents. It sounds creepy. The back says, "I am afraid that I have no secrets. I am afraid of my secrets. I am afraid of everyone else's secrets." So it sounds pretty cool. It says that it's good for fans of We Were Liars, and I love that book. So the next is an anthology that I have heard of before. This is Last Night a Superhero Saved My Life. This is an anthology by a lot of, or many famous YA authors, and it's all stories, or essays rather, of how superheroes have affected, have formed, have shaped their lives, and the lessons that they've learned from them. I love superheroes. Superman, Daredevil, and Spider-Man were my jam in high school. I loved them so much, and they shaped me in a lot of ways. And so I really am excited to hear how authors have been shaped, authors whose books I've read, and how that may have influenced who they are and what they end up writing about. You're never gonna believe this one. I walked into this bookstore figuring I was gonna find a few things. I ended up walking out with Becky Albertalli's The Upside of Unrequited. Now, you've probably heard of this story, but if you haven't, this is a story of a girl who is too afraid of rejection to actually approach anyone that she's ever had a crush on. She's experienced 26 crushes in her life. All of them have been unrequited. Get the title? Her reasoning is that fat girls always have to be careful. So she ends up not really living her life, and her sister ends up getting really upset with her about it. She tells her to woman up, get over it, deal with it, and go and actually face your fears. Then a girl comes into the picture that her sister falls madly head over heels for, and she kind of loses touch with her sister because of it. The only saving grace is that this mystery girl happens to have a brother who the main character ends up also crushing on. And so she thinks that, hey, if I, end up dating this dude, then I'll get my sister back, at least in a little bit of a way, because I'll get to be with her, I suppose. This is how her reasoning works. Enter love triangle with a geeky boss boy, and it sounds like that is the story. I don't know much beyond that, besides that I've heard that it is a fantastic story, and I've heard fantastic things about Becky Albertalli. And now I have her signature. This signed copy, signed first edition copy, was $3. It looks brand new. I don't even know if it was ever read, kind of brand new. I was so amazed that I found this there. Which actually leads me to another insane find that I found, which is Julie Murphy's Ramona Blue, which is also a signed first edition copy. I don't understand why you would buy this book and then get rid of it. Like, it costs money. Like, look at that. That's her signature. I can't believe it. But this is a story of a girl, Ramona, who she was forced to grow up too soon. Her family was kind of torn apart, or rather torn out of their homes by Hurricane Katrina when she was 5, and they've had to struggle to survive, really, since then. And she ends up, many, many years later, having to take the brunt of the responsibility in maintaining a roof over their heads, in keeping money coming in, taking like 3 jobs at a time to make ends meet. There are a few things that Ramona knows about herself. She is very, very tall. She stands out from the crowd because she's got very striking blue hair, and she's a lesbian. At least she thought so until her childhood friend enters the picture, and she starts to feel things for him that she didn't think were possible. And she starts to question whether or not she is actually a lesbian or whether or not she's bi. I don't know if it's a love story. I don't know if it's more of a story about her coping with her life and what happened to her family. But I do know that I really like Julie Murphy. She's the same author who wrote Dumplin', and I really, really enjoyed Dumplin'. So I was super psyched to pick this up, and now I have it. And it's got her signature, and it was $3. So the next one I picked up because it was described to me as a Nigerian Harry Potter. How could I not pick that up? That is a Kata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. This is the same author who wrote, I think it's Binti or Bintu, which was a sci-fi novella that was really popular, at least last year. This is a story about a girl who is albino, which is kind of interesting, who has magical powers, goes to a magical school, and then tracks down a serial killer. It sounds fantastic. I really want to read it. I'm kind of like, this cover's cool. I like it. It's okay. But the new paperback covers of this book look so awesome. I can't get over it. I really wish that I had the paperback covers, but I'm not a person who can justify buying books that are new books just because they have pretty covers if I already own a copy. So I'm not going to do that. I'm totally not going to do that. Oh, it'll be okay. But yeah, that's a Kata Witch. And I know that there's a sequel coming out. If it hasn't already come out, then it is coming out very soon. The next one is Graceling by Kristen Kishore. And I heard of this book when I was watching one of my favorite YouTubers, Problems of a Book Nerd, is what I believe her channel is called. And she was talking about how it featured a love story in a not disgusting kind of way. This is a story about, what's her name? Katsa, who lives in a world where some people are born with an kind of unnatural skill. This is called a grace, and these graces are feared by most and exploited by many. And Katsa ends up being born with a skill, with one of these graces, the grace of killing, which you can imagine means that she's a pretty valuable weapon, which is exactly how she ends up basically being a slave to the king of their kingdom and being called upon to take care of his, problems by torturing and killing and dealing with all of the people who displease him. You can imagine she also doesn't enjoy that very much. Then another person who happens to have a grace named Poe comes into the picture, and through interacting with Poe, she ends up finding out a little bit more about her grace, something that up until that point she had hated and despised about herself, and learns a little bit more about her self-identity through that process. The next one I borrowed from the library a while back on my Kindle, but the library took it back before I had made it more than halfway through. But the story was too great to pass up. That is Dark Life by Cat Falls. And this is a kind of post-apocalyptic world setting where the sun has gotten really hot, and so basically it melted the ice caps and flooded a lot of the world, which means that there's a lot less land and there's a lot more people that are trying to live on that land. Land is full of buildings that are apartment complexes, that are jails in the same buildings as apartment complexes. They are just huge multi-story buildings, and that's partly because if you go outside, you will burn. It's not a, oh, if you stay out for a little while, you'll burn. No, you have to wear goggles, you have to cover all of your skin. The setting of this is really interesting because what ends up happening is, as a sort of government push, people have taken to diving down to the depths of the ocean and are trying to see if they can farm and create a livelihood under the sea, which is so cool. Down to the last three, guys. The next one I have a really short description for because you've probably heard of it. That is Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. This, I feel, is best described as Frozen with lesbian characters. That's how I take it. Obviously, I haven't read it, but that's how it sounds. It's basically there's two princesses who end up falling in love and have to hide their magical powers. Yeah. I don't know. I am psyched for it because it sounds just like Frozen, and I loved that. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Let it go. The next one is kind of interesting. It is Sharon Cameron's The Forgetting. This takes place in a city where every 12 years a ceremony happens called The Forgetting. No one really knows how because it's been forgotten. And in this town, your identity is your book. Whatever you write in your book is what is remembered. If it's not written down, it's forgotten every 12 years. And so it's the story of a girl who wants to remember everything, but most importantly, doesn't want to be forgotten. And this leads her down a path of trying to figure out why this happens, what lies behind the city walls, because it's forbidden to leave the city, but I think it's been forgotten as to why it's forbidden to leave the city. And so it just brings up all of these questions, and I think it's a really interesting concept that I'm really psyched to see how it plays out within the pages of this book. And last but not least, I have Jessie Andrews' The Haterz. This is a book that features three characters, three kids who go to a jazz band camp one summer and decide that the jazz band camp is for chumps, think that they can make a better band, the best band of all time, and rate the best song of all time, and go to the best gig of all time, and so go on an epic adventure to explore that possibility without parent permission, in a car that they bought with a parent's credit card, without money, really, and they just go. It is crazy. They go through some pretty insane situations and discover some things about themselves. Shh. I'm sorry, my phone keeps buzzing. I have read this. I really enjoyed it. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy Jessie Andrews' kind of harsh, grungy kind of writing style, but I was all over it. If you don't like curse words, don't read this book. Basically. It's good. It's really good. And that's my book haul of giant epic proportions. Believe it or not, this is less books than I ended up unhauling, which means it is for the better, ultimately. I got all of these for without spending any money. I ended up actually having extra cash left over using my gift card, and bought my mom a few books as well, which is really exciting because my mom doesn't really like reading as much as I do. So I was really psyched to get to share that with her. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got some ideas. If this is part 2, then cool. Thanks for sticking with me. Let me know down in the comments which ones you have read, which ones you think I should start reading first. Do you think that it's worth the unhaul if I end up just hauling more books with the cash that I get back? And if, based on what books I ended up picking up, if you can recommend any that I should read. Please like, subscribe, and come back soon. Thanks so much for stopping by.